We're going to be recording all the sessions so that other parents who aren't able to make it today kind of have it available for them. And I am actually pulling up this schedule so that I can make sure I remember everybody. The first thing I'm going to do today is kind of give you a big picture of where we've been, why we started, and then moving forward. Actually, Dr. Stacey's going to talk a little bit more about where we're going. But before I do that, I wanted to introduce you a little bit more to the speakers who are going to talk throughout the day. You met them all. They're all teachers here. But a little bit about why we chose their topics and why they're in particular talking about them. And so we're all starting together when we talk about the future of the whole school because it affects everyone. But then we've kind of designed two different tracks depending on the age of your students. Now that's totally up to you as to what you want to go and look at or hear. So it doesn't matter too much. But in general, we always have a lower school track and an upper school track happening at the same time. Our first speaker for the lower school track is Megan Muller and maybe Charlie. And Megan's going to be talking about something that was really essential to our school from the beginning, which is why we incorporate so much play, free time, gardening, music, all these things that seem extracurricular, but to us aren't extracurricular. They're very essential to who we are and what we're a part of. If you've ever wondered why they run around so much, why they climb trees, why they fall down, why they're so dirty when they get back to the I had Enzo in my office on Thursday, and it was like just a sand person. Like, it was just sand. It was amazing. There was like no break to see his skin. So if you've ever wondered some of those things, that'd be a really good talk to go to. At the same time, Mr. Yee is going to be talking about some of the equivalent things in upper school, which is why we do hard things. That may be academic, like calculus. Why do we have all of our seniors do calculus unless they really seriously rebel and tell us no? But that's the general track. Or why do we make them go on retreat and do hard things there? That would be Mr. Yee's talk. And Mr. Yee actually just accepted this year the position of Dean of Co-Curriculars, so he thinks about these things a lot. And the things that happen that are community-wide for our students are often designed by Mr. Yee, thinking about our educational goals and how they match sort of what we want to do as a community. And then after that at 11:30, I'm going to be speaking on our elementary language arts and why they are designed the way they are, how they develop, why they go slow in the beginning, several other things like that. And Mr. Gilbert and Mr. Muller will be talking about Great Books. The Great Books program is really a hallmark of what we do here, and it's really, really hard, and it takes up lots and lots of time. And so one of the things they're going to be talking about is why students who maybe aren't the best and the brightest student you've ever seen, or who want to just go be an accountant or an engineer, why do they have to read all these really, really hard books? Why don't we just focus on their math education, teach them how to write sentences, and move on? So that will be Mr. Muller and Mr. Gilbert. Then you guys have a long break for lunch. I hope you go and enjoy your time with one another. There's lots of restaurants around here, especially at HPU. They just opened like a couple different places down there that I kept thinking, this is going to be so great, I'm going to go all the time, and I never do. But they're there, they're very close, so they're very convenient. And then after lunch, Ms. Zimmerman and Mrs. Cogburn are going to be talking about early childhood education, specifically what pre-K and kindergarten look like at this school and why they look the way they do. So if you want kind of a comprehensive view of what the little guys are doing day in and day out, that's a great place to go. They've thought a lot about it. And then on the other side of things, Mrs. Muller is going to be back to talk about college prep. Coming from higher education, as a lot of our leadership has, we have thought a lot about college prep, about what is actually effective use of a school and students' time versus what are sort of common practices that take up a lot of students' times. And then also some of the very common anxieties that go along with applying for college and going to college, and how we can best mitigate them, understand them, and pick a college that really is right for your student. And then at the very end, two very important talks. One is how to know everything with Lily Yee. Lily is going to walk, if you've ever felt lost at the school, or you ever felt like you don't know what's going on, Lily's going to walk you through everything that tells you everything. So she's going to show you how to use Parents Web, she's going to show you all the calendars, and they're very many places, tell you about some of the parent opportunities for volunteering and community and events that are coming up throughout the year. Any other big parts of that?
That's
lots and lots of things.
Yeah, there's lots of things in there.
So very practical, but then you can be a guide to all your friends of how to know what's going on. And then Dr. Stacey will be back to talk to us about not only the college here, but what he sees going on in higher education in general. So if you've got students who are bound for college soon, it would be really important to hear what he has to say about where we're going and what college might look like in a few years when your students are actually starting to think about it. So I really hope you enjoy today. I think we'll have more people in and out as we go along. But this morning, my first goal is to remind you of a sort of big picture of where we're at as a school. I think it's easy, particularly if you've joined this year, to forget how young we are. And yet being a new school really has a huge impact on everything we do, for better or for worse. Over the last 6 years that I've lived here, because of the 2 jobs that I've had, I've visited tons of Houston private schools in particular, and some public, many of which have been around for 20 to 50, maybe more years. And it's really easy to compare where we're at now with what they're doing there. And we don't always come off looking so awesome, right? They're going to have these beautiful buildings, and all these people work there, and they all have shiny name tags, and their students are always wearing these very tidy uniforms, and ours are like, there's some real disadvantages to being so young. We're a lot less shiny than a lot of the options you could have been looking at. We're too small, older buildings filled with donated furniture that we have tried to assemble in the most aesthetically non-offensive way we possibly can. It's amazing as a 3-year-old school that we've done that, right? Like, we should be in a church basement somewhere. This is very unusual. We had a school consultant out from Idaho, and he was looking around the property. He's from the West, and so he looked around and said, "This is about a $10 million property." And I was like, "Ha ha ha, welcome to Texas." But he also said, "You guys must be about 12 years old." I said, "No." This was last year. We're 2 years old. He was very impressed, but when you go and look at what Houston has to offer, there's many amazing schools around. A lot of that comes because we have less money. We don't have a large alumni network or donor network that we've been able to establish over 20 to 30 years. And infrastructure like that, or infrastructure like back offices and things like that, takes years to put in place well. And so we're a lot leaner, which can be a really good thing, than a lot of schools are. Another thing is that a lot of the cool things, a lot of the extras that come with school, like sports or really well-established bands or a theater, that stuff's still growing. That's just starting. And so your students get to be a part of a new thing, but they don't get to jump into an old thing that's already established for them. And there's good sides to both of those things. With these downsides, there's wonderful things about being a new school. We're incredibly flexible. We're always listening. We want to know what you think, because there's going to be changes as we grow, and we want to know that we're on the right track. One of the things we've always been very committed to and have been able to maintain over the last few years is a kind of leanness in our administrative offices. That's directly tied to tuition. That's why we do it. It makes for some a lot of work for Dr. Stacey this week, for instance, when our air conditioning goes out or something like that. We don't have building managers running around. We just have Dr. Stacey. And then I get to tell him, "Oh, so the toilet's leaking." And it's a really fun day. But we're very intentional. We don't add people when it would be convenient to do so, because we know that that is going to go to your students' tuition. There's no other way to add people. And so we want to make sure that we're doing it as carefully and as affordably as possible. You're also not in a school that's in a place where we just rinse and repeat. There's kind of literally no way for us to be like, well, that's the way it's always been done, so we're going to do it that way, right? Like, because we've only had a few years, We're still very much in the design and development process. And so you're not going to get stuck in a system that's not working, but everyone's so used to that they're not willing to give up. And then the biggest thing is that because we're new and because we're a smaller community, your families are going to shape that community. For better, for worse, you're a part of it and you're going to make this school what it is. I always find that kind of thing really exciting. Some people find it a little scary. But your kids, your kids might be the inventor of a new rule or something like that. They discovered something that no one had ever thought of. And lots of people are inventors of new clubs. New club. We have the other day I walked into a room and was like, "What are you guys all doing here?" And they're like, "We're a cooking club." And I was like, "Oh, okay." How are you going to cook? I don't know what you're going to do. They're working on it. So. I wanted to remind you a little bit, and because some of you may not have heard it or you haven't heard it since your admissions interview, of kind of how we got started. We were initially 4 people who were working in higher education in 4 different areas at one university. Dr. Reynolds was seeing through his role as a provost of the university, the chief academic officer who was in charge of all the faculty and the entire budget that goes with faculty. He was seeing the weight of incredible administrative overload. The weight this was putting on student tuition, on teacher and student experience, on the quality of the classroom. Universities, and this isn't a criticism of any particular university because they're kind of all built this way, they're massive structures. They're massive. And they need a lot of infrastructure and money, a lot of money to run. And so that need for money, especially as the economy and as people's preferences and interests are changing a lot right now, that need for money, if you're not a really well-established institution, something like Rice, a lot of colleges are really struggling. And that need for money can start to dominate everything, can dictate the goals of the classroom, the direction of the academic vision, and the student experience and requirements. Students might not know that, but sometimes us teachers realize it. Like, we're doing this not because it's what's best for the student, we're doing it because we have to, because it's going to help the bottom line. Dr. Stacey is one of the leaders and founders of the Honors College, was seeing the best and the brightest that this university had to offer, and yet still seeing gaps in their educational experience from before, still seeing where they were weak, and what could have happened before to help prepare them. Megan Muller was the director of academic success, which meant that she was in charge of all the tutoring centers and programs on campus, so she was seeing the opposite end. She was seeing students who came to school, maybe they just barely got in, or they're a student athlete, and so they're there for that, and we're all trying to help them stay, you know? And so she was seeing kind of that bottom rung, people who were spending lots and lots and lots of money to be at college and maybe weren't going to make it. And so they would walk out without a college degree and with a massive amount of debt. She was also seeing the tax on student athletes in athletics programs, students who were burning out, students being left behind. And then my job as director of dual enrollment was really unique because I was traveling about 200 miles a week to 4 to 5 different Houston schools or homeschool groups in every week, teaching dual enrollment classes, teaching students who were in high school, but who were ready for college classes. And so I got to kind of firsthand experience a lot of Houston's great schools and great homeschool communities. And yet we were still seeing these breaks where students would graduate high school and not be at all ready for a college education. A lot of these seemed really simple, like they didn't know how to manage their time because high school looked just like elementary school, which always had exactly the dictates that they needed, right? You have an assignment sheet that's going to be due the next day, you have a workbook, you have a little note that you write from your teacher, she's going to probably tell your parents so that they remind you, and maybe you're in school 40 hours a week. You get dropped into freshman year at a university, you're in class maybe 15 hours a week, and your professors aren't going to do any of that for you, right? They're going to hand you a syllabus and expect you to be responsible with it. And we weren't training our seniors how to do that at all. And so we would see a lot of students who maybe were capable and yet just didn't know how to handle their own time. They hadn't bridged that gap to adulthood, even that first kind of gap to adulthood of needing to be in charge of themselves. More importantly, it was amazing to me how many students had never been taught to write or think like adults. So it's hard to know when to make that transition, and I understand that. It's hard to look at a 13-year-old and say, am I gonna push you to think your own thoughts? That could be dangerous. Who knows what's gonna happen, right? Like, what are you thinking? Nobody knows. But if we don't do that, if we don't start introducing them to thinking through their own ideas and analyzing something for themselves, they get to be 18 and they've never done it. And so then you throw them into a university or college that maybe is opposed to what they've always been brought up to believe. Or it's agreeing, but for bad reasons, and they don't really know how to handle that either. And so we were seeing a lot of students who didn't really know how to interact with the classroom, that had a lot of different ideas going around, and students who didn't know how to communicate their own ideas very well, whether that be in the written word or speaking. But there was another thing I was also seeing. I would see students who would come to our classes who would recognize, who would know that the work they were about to be asked to do in dual enrollment classes was 3 times what their peers in the regular English class were going to be doing. And they would stick it out, and they'd want to do it. They didn't want to go back to what I always heard, normal school. Because they were ready. They wanted this challenge. It wasn't their fault they weren't being given it. It was ours. They were ready for these kind of books, for this kind of writing challenge, for this kind of a conversation. They were excited to be a part of it, just no one had been giving it to them. No one had been trusting them with this kind of developmental leap. So all of us, all 4 of us, were thinking there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way starting all the way down from pre-K up through college. What has kind of gone wrong with the systems that we have in place? Why don't they work together? Why, if we devote 18 years of our child's life to school as their full-time thing, why aren't they awesome at it? All of them, right? Like, that's a really long time. If any of you were in a single job for 18 years, you would be great. And yet something kept breaking down all the way along. We were very, very fortunate to be introduced to a group of priests and donors who wanted to start this school and who were generous enough to give us a year before any students walked through the door to think through all the details of how this was going to look. And so that's what we did. Dr. Stacey and Dr. Reynolds really focusing on higher education and what college needs to look like. My job was to look at pre-K4 all the way through 12th grade and say, how do we want to teach our students with the idea that we need to prepare them for adulthood. And one of the things that we started with was a theory of why things had been going badly in conventional education. And I think it's due to sort of a fundamental misunderstanding of the human person, and then applying that misunderstanding directly to what it means to be successful. I think Mr. Yee's going to talk about this a little. I know Mr. Muller will. I know I will in the language arts section. But you see kind of a historical movement, maybe particularly post World War II, but the Depression plays into this and a lot of other things as well, where you have to educate the masses. And yet there's still a snobbery about doing so that says, well, these guys are just worker people. So let's just make them good worker people and not have to educate them the way we do the rich and the elite who don't have to be worker people. They're going to be leader people. They get to read all the good books, think well, have tutors, learn foreign languages. These people just need to learn how to stand in line, follow the buttons, and do their thing. This turns out not to be a great recipe for human flourishing. And our schools often look like little people factories, where we move them from place to place. We give them very set activities that we can measure very concretely to see whether or not they've been successful at it. But this isn't very human. Any of us who have young children know how hard it is to even predict what they're going to do next, right? Like, I have an 18-month-old or 20-month-old now who, like, I don't know what he's about to find interesting, right? He's like changing every single day. All of a sudden, I'm like, where my husband and I are in this place where we both we'll like see him learn a new skill. Like all of a sudden he'll like open a top off of a little container and we're like, oh my gosh, oh no. Now you can do that. Our life just got harder. Like he like walked up and opened the front door and I was like, what? No, what are we gonna do? We're just gonna leave. I'm not gonna notice. So like imagine putting that with 15 kids in a room and we're all trying to get them to get the same standardized results. It doesn't make any sense. That's not how people are. This has been kind of pushed down from a college culture that wants to assign you a number and tell you how successful you're going to be in college. This has never worked, right? SATs, testing scores, they're very bad at predicting college success. We keep pretending like they're going to be good at it, but you have to score like really, really, really well at an SAT for us to actually know you're going to be good at college. Like top 5%, then we're like, okay, you're going to be fine. If you got a 900 on the SAT, you might still be good at college. We just actually don't know, right? I had a friend who did that, went to actually a really good college and did great. She was just bad at tests. My sister is very similar. But you also have a lot of students who score fairly high and have never been given the skills it actually takes to be a successful adult. During our year of development, we were able to kind of dig into this and see how this was happening elementary school years all the way up through high school, seeing schools driven by test scores and student success matrices that led directly into a college system, and that this was leaking down to our very youngest children. Students in kindergarten are often being asked to sit for exams, which is a pretty absurd idea when you think about it. Yet, for a lot of schools, those exam results are driven directly to their funding. That's exactly how public education works. Like, if you have a failing classroom because your test scores are bad, you're going to lose your money. And so you have this huge impetus to make sure your 6-year-olds are all checking the right boxes, which, if you've ever met a 6-year-old, you'll know they're very bad at checking the right box, right? They've got all sorts of other things they're thinking about, and they don't care about them. So we begin to confine students to very adult-like structures of sit in this spot, go here, do this, be quiet. They're not very good at it. It's also shaped what we taught and why. If you can get a student reading really young and really fast, you can get them taking tests sooner. Development through play, though it has universally been shown to be the way in which young children learn best, isn't testable. It's so unique to the child and it's too varied in what they're going to learn or the time it's going to take them to learn it. So we take it out and go with what can be shown to be successful on a Scantron. During this year of thinking through these things, I kept asking myself a question. If we're totally free from current convention, where do we find the very best practices to develop children who are ready to flourish in every area of their life? And I was in this incredible spot of actually being totally free from current conventions. We had a group of people who were sponsoring us who didn't ask us to do standardized exams, who didn't ask us to pick a boxed curriculum and just set it in a classroom and say, okay, that's what we're going to do. They really gave us the flexibility to do this and ask, what should a school look like if the goal in mind is human flourishing from the bottom all the way to the top? I'm going to spend a little time today talking about what we came up with and where we're going, using core principles that define our pre-K through 12th grade. These are ideas that we've been driven from by the beginning, but it's a way of saying it that I've never really used before. The first is that flourishing in young children comes from play, security, relationship, and balance. And so when we're looking at our 4-year-olds, or my 2-year-old comes here every day, we're looking at our youngest children all the way up through 8 or so. That's where they flourish. When they're safe, they're secure, they're flexible, they're playing a lot, and they know who the adults are in the room. They know that Mrs. Cogburn is on their side, or their house head knows them. And the balance that they need to do lots of different things in lots of different ways. And so you're not just sitting at your desk all day. Miss Zimmerman's really good at this. If you guys ever just go peek in her classroom, you'll see all these little places that they go to. So we have a reading corner, and we have the desks where we do our math.
Yeah. Can you say those 4 things?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And then we have history over here where there's timelines. But the flourishing in young children's comes from play, security, relationship, and balance. Yeah. They eat a lot. Like they take breaks and they eat because they get tired because they've been running around and they need a little bit of nourishment. And those things have all been thought through so that they don't wear themselves out. Now they still wear themselves out. As any of you who drive them home know, they're all like, as soon as they get in the car. But we do our best to give them little breaks. In middle years, and this might be kind of the hardest age group to, I think, define in one way, because I think this is where they get really varied. You know, students really kind of start becoming their own people. I mean, they've always been their own people, but their personalities and maybe their difficulties or their talents start to really come out around 8 or 9. And so oftentimes the thing I hear most from a 3rd grade teacher is like, half the class is here and half the class is here. You know, and it's so typical. It's so typical to have maybe a group, sometimes mostly boys, who are a little bit slower than all the girls who are like, we're ready, like give us the stuff to do. It's very, very typical because we don't all grow up at the same time. And that's okay. We never were meant to all grow up at the same time. But flourishing in the middle years also comes from play, but then it also comes from understanding and ownership. So they have to start to be told why, right? They're gonna, you know this because they ask you why all the time. They have to be told why, and they have to know that they have responsibilities that are theirs to maintain. And so play and understanding, ownership, challenge, and fun. I had a student come up to me yesterday and said, I had a great day today. I was like, oh, great, how come? Because we got to play around the world in Latin. I was like, I don't know what that means. Do you have a basketball? Like, I have no idea what you're doing, but she was really excited because her team won the Latin game and she didn't think she knew like what she knew in Latin, and she was really excited because it had become fun and a challenge. And I think in that kind of team competitive environment, there was also some real ownership there. And then in teenagers, flourishing comes from challenge and success. So having met a challenge that was truly hard and being successful at it. Understanding is very important for a teenager. Charity and community. They have to know where they are and that people want them to be there, because they're very worried about that. And so understanding that they are a part of something, our 9th grade has been really great about this. You know, we had half of them were upcoming 8th graders and half were all new. And we saw them just really come together at the high school retreat. They all eat lunch together every day. They're all very different, but there's a sense of community that kind of really instantly evolved, and it's been helping them out in huge ways in all of their classes. They're a really, really fun group to teach. And so flourishing in teenagers comes from challenge and success, understanding, charity, and community. And those things working together to eventually result in autonomy, to be someone who can live on their own, make their own decisions, think through things for themselves, and be responsible. I always tell teenagers that being a teenager is a really weird time in life because you're developing your own preferences, and they're real and good, and you should be, right? Like it may be something small. It may be that you hate the music that your parents listen to, or you think they watch dumb TV. That's fine, that's normal. It could be bigger. You could start questioning, why do we go to this church? Like, why do we worship in this way? But that, they have to, right? They have to ask those questions, because when they're an adult, they have to make those decisions themselves. Yet at the same time, they're not responsible for those decisions. They don't get to choose what church they go to or what music's on in the car, because it's your car. And it's your family that you take to church. And so we tell them, like, you're in a weird spot. You're in a spot where as a growing up person, you're learning adult preferences while not having the actual power to put them into place. And that's odd. By the time you're 5 years from now, you'll have a lot more autonomy to make all those things happen for yourself. But the great thing about that is you don't have the risk of making really stupid decisions because your parents are going to stop you. So try it out, right? Be like, I think we should go to this crazy church and see what they say. You might actually be able to like talk things through and make decisions and realize why you're being dumb before you actually go and like do it. So having preferences is a really, really good thing, and we want those to eventually result in autonomy. Something else I think it's really, really essential for all schools to remember, and we don't, which is very typical because it's our job, it's our day in, day out. But academic skills are secondary good. They are not good in and of themselves. They are tools towards a good life. Now, I think the reason I work at schools is second to your spiritual life and your relationships. I think those academic skills are the most formational tool you have. And so how you go to school, how you do school really, really matters, but it matters because it's directing you towards a kind of life, not because it's its own thing that matters. There may be some exceptions to this. I actually just learned like this year that, I think it might have been you that told me this, that the fine arts are called that because they're ends in and of themselves. They're not tools. Learning music is great because music is great. That's it. It doesn't have to teach you about math. It doesn't have to do anything. It just has to be great, and your participating in it is great. But most skills aren't like that. Why do we learn to read? Because it will teach us stuff. And because we need to live in the world where we can be informed. If that wasn't the case, reading wouldn't be a useful tool. Now it is, and it's incredibly useful, maybe the most useful tool in learning how to do things and learning how to live and work. But academic skills are secondary goods. And so if at any point they're harming the ultimate good of human flourishing, of understanding God and yourself and the relationship between the two of you, then they need to be foregone or they need to be changed. This gets especially tricky in the upper school because we confront really challenging ideas. I'm teaching the juniors right now, and we're reading Paradise Lost, and it's a scary book to teach. It's a really scary book to teach. And I tell them that at the beginning. Like, I love this book. I love the conversations we're going to have, but I'm always afraid. Because we're going to ask, is God a tyrant? Is freedom, for freedom's sake, fine and good? And so Satan has a point? And whenever you're asking if Satan has a point, you're just treading on thin ice. Students are always like, I don't want to side with Satan, but I kind of do right now. It's like, I know, we just change his name in your head and think it might help. It's a scary thing to do because you're confronting real ideas. Yeah, it's very persuasive.
It built it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. And I tell them that. Like, if this were set in a Greek war, for instance, you would hear these speeches and think he was the greatest military general in the world. Now, he's Satan leading a bunch of demons, so you get a hint that maybe he's wrong. But it's a scary book to teach. Yeah, maybe. And so sometimes I have to ask myself, is this book okay for this guy in this chair? Or is this going to be too much for him? And I don't always know. And so we do our best to keep the conversation open and keep talking. When we designed the Saint Constantine School, we tried to keep all these things in mind. But what's even more difficult is to keep them all in mind as we just maintain. As we grow and we hire and we go in and out of the day to day to day, it's really easy to kind of want to fall back on convention, to think if I just bought this big pack of curriculum that I don't think is very good but is very easy to use, like, wouldn't that be easy for everybody? Wouldn't that just be great? And having to kind of fight that off all the time. Having to think through every hire to make sure they understand what's going on different here than might be somewhere else. It's a hard thing, but it's our goal. Implementing these overarching principles in the daily life of the school requires constant vigilance on our part. It requires constant care and training, trial and error, and a lot of conversation. But it's our goal. So that's kind of where we're at. And I wanted to talk a little bit, and then Dr. Stacey's going to talk more about where we're going. Some of you should know this, but we just purchased our property 2 weeks ago, which is really great and exciting. We're here for this long haul. It's 6.5 acres. It's not huge, and that's okay with us because we don't want to be huge. We want to be about twice the size we are now, a little more. And the reason for that is because that gives us about 2 or 3, depending on the class year, like maybe 3 sections of high school. I don't know, we'll work it out. 2 to 3 class sections per grade level. So the classes don't get bigger, but you have 2 kindergarten classrooms. And it allows for things like sports or rigorous activities like that in upper school without being so big that we don't know everybody's name. In 5 years, right, something like that, we would like to have a body of 500 students because that what helps us be long-term sustainable at our current tuition rate so that we're not always demanding more and more from our families. But it doesn't make us so big. I've worked at lots and lots of places that are about that size, and you can know everybody. It seems weird because 500 sounds like a lot, but you really can generally know everybody. But a school of that size here on this campus, that's primary purpose is to always serve the students, the family, and the staff in a rich community bent on the development of the human soul. Throughout the day today, you're going to see that in place in our pedagogy and classroom instruction in particular, though Mrs. Muller and Mr. Yee are going to touch for sure on things outside of the classroom. I hope that when we do the next conference, whether that be a year from now or in the spring, probably a year from now, that we'll look a little bit more about what that looks like in student discipline or a lot of the outside activities or why music, why gardens, clubs, and all of those things that aren't necessarily part of the classroom experience. Our high school band wanted to play for you today, and then they played for me, and they were like, never mind, we're not ready, we're not coming. And I was like, okay. They weren't ready. They're working on it. Yeah.
The 500, is that pre-K through 12?
Yes.
Or is that, okay, so that doesn't count college?
Oh, actually it does. It does, yeah.
Okay.
The college will be about 60 people if it's huge, if it's as big as we want it to.
What are we today?
12? 8?
7.
7?
Okay.
Yeah, we're smart. Our goal for next year's, and you all can be praying for, is an incoming freshman class of 12. That's what we would love to see. We had our biggest ever incoming class this year. 4. Speaking of classrooms, I'm going to confess some things. As I mentioned, we bought the property 2 weeks ago, and I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that we're not very shiny. This week we have been feeling particularly not shiny. Our buildings have been in open rebellion against us, as far as we can tell. Our 20-some-year-old air conditioner in West decided it was dead. It was done with its lifelong service. And so we're replacing that, but that means that we have 3 classrooms that don't have air conditioning next week, which is super exciting. We have to find new places for students. And we're so packed. Every single room in this building gets used every single second of the day. And so we have our wonderful neighbors at CBS who've been helping us out and lending us some of their classrooms. And then on top of that, our student bathroom in here decided to have a mainline plug. So we got to do a big giant sewer project. And all of the staff and faculty got to share a bathroom for 3 days. Super fun. And so one of the things that we are most looking forward to and is absolutely essential for us next year is our new building, which as part of the purchasing of the property, we were able to mortgage and get started on. We're now just waiting for our city permits, which apparently take longer than the actual construction process from what we've been told from our architects. And so we're looking forward this next week. Bathrooms are fixed now. We're going to have a new air conditioner in West, bringing unprecedented comfort to that building because that other air conditioner was never great. But we're we're desperately in need of more classrooms. And so next year, probably breaking ground in November, at least formally, like when the bishop's here, maybe not officially until January or something like that, yeah. We are getting started on a 10 classroom building that will be up and running by August. And so Dr. Stacey is going to tell you about that.
First of all, thank you all for coming out. Saturday morning, gosh, you could be doing anything. You could be sleeping right now. You've chosen to be here, so we're grateful for that. I always get so excited when I hear Cate speak about our school. I can do that a lot. We do this, and I get this sort of thing, but she is so correct. And we have just a rich number of blessings. God has been very good to us as a school. And it is, I would love to say it's our cleverness and shrewdness that allowed us to acquire this property. It was the very generous support of donors and supporters to the school that made this possible. Now, what you see here, you may have seen this before if you were with us at the end of school last year we got together. This is just sort of an architect's drawing of the property as it exists right now. You are here. Right. So there's the main building. You recognize it. This is our parking lot. There's West. Right there is the non-functioning air conditioning unit. Building 3, which is very nice. I want you to take a moment to soak in the nomenclature that we bought. The Maze building, the West building, and number 3. I'm never changing the building. D. I think that'll be what we're looking for, I just went 2 slides forward. What we're looking for, we're about to do, as Cate said, break ground hopefully later this semester, is an additional classroom building that will go on this part of the property, that thing in blue there. And going along with that, because you can probably appreciate some of the, I'll bet some of you can really appreciate some of the issues we have just with drop off and pick up and so forth. And it's not that we have adequate parking. We have parking spaces. That's not our problem. It's really more the flow. And as it kind of works now. It's not a terrible thing, but as we add students, as we get closer to 300 or 400 or even more, that flow would become, I think, problematic at some point. So with the help of our architect and the general contractor, we're going to be putting a new parking lot along Regency Square. Be a little bit larger in terms of number of spaces, but also it's a long lead time there, so you got plenty of space to load and offload kids. But also secured perimeter, so there's a fence around all of the parking lot as well. So once you're inside there's a lot of security. This 10 classroom building right here, I'm going to give just a few moments to our architect put together kind of a 3D sort of fly-through rendering, which I'm going to play for us here in just a moment. But notice here there's a kind of sort of bridge that connects. There's a gate that goes through the parking lot, but enters into this sort of covered area here. It becomes sort of a security checkpoint, right? Nobody can come into the campus without going through it. And it'll be sort of manned at all times, so there's never a time when, so we have sort of the front desk now, right? But think about how it works. Once you enter the parking lot, we hope you come through that door, but we can't necessarily guarantee you do, right? So, but in the future iteration, once this building is complete, you will have, the only way into the campus will be through that one point. And so then we'll be able to sort of make sure everybody's going where they need to be, nobody's here who shouldn't be, etc. I think I'll show you the 3D rendering in a moment, but I also want to give you just a sort of a little look at the future as we think about sort of what the campus would look like as we sort of grow into that 400 or even 500 students maybe. What is currently our parking lot really becomes a courtyard for us. That'll happen by the time we start school again next year. So right now all blacktop and stripes and so forth will go away and become a grassy area with tables and benches. Students can have lunch out there. So it'll be a much more sort of pleasant, I think, space for us. And still becomes sort of central. You see like the entrance of this building and all the other sort of empty onto that one courtyard together. So it becomes kind of a community spot for us. We still maintain our field and our playground, obviously. One thing I have to say, when we talked last May, is the location of our covered basketball court is probably actually going to move over to this side of the property, as we were talking with the architect and the contractor. There's just lots of reasons why that makes more sense. But we'll have an outdoor play space then for older kids as well as younger kids. Let me move forward though, show you a little bit more of what the future might look like for us. Ultimately, we think we need yet another building. 10 classrooms sounds great, right? We can't wait. Kate is right. We are eager to get, we could use those 10 classrooms. But we will fill those 10 classrooms up pretty fast. And very shortly, once that building is complete, we will need to be thinking about sort of the next, and hopefully then for us, our final addition to the campus, a larger building that would have sort of a multi-function. We would like to have a gymnasium in that building. And an auditorium. That could be sometimes the same space, right? Those can be converted one to another. Lots of schools do like that. But then also would add a number of additional classrooms that would flesh out our total facilities needs up to that 400 or 500 student level without ever having to build again. That goes. Well, notice what happens though to the West building. It vanished. Right? It's gone.
Hooray!
Nobody's using it. I have this feeling, I haven't tried it yet, if we got like all of our seniors, we all leaned on one side, I think we could take it down. But we haven't tried.
Demo day.
Exactly, that's going to be a lot of fun when that day comes. One of the things, Dr. Reynolds is out of town, he wanted to be here, but he's not able to be here today. He wanted me to say, he wanted to make sure that I cleared up if there's any, every once in a while gets feedback on sort of strange rumors that develop about our future plans. This building, we don't really know anything about it yet. Like this red blob you see here is about all we've done on that building, right? So it could be many different things, right? We don't know what that is yet. He recently had a parent lamenting, I'm sorry, you're canceling the music program. We're not canceling the music program. Sort of as the rumor mill goes, right? Well, there are no practice rooms in the new building. That must mean you've decided you don't like music anymore, so you're going to stop. Well, no. This has 10 classrooms. I know that. I've seen the architect's renderings. I know how that works. The red one, again, it could be lots of different things. We need to sort of think through. And we'll have times, by the way, we're going to invite parents to another session at some future iteration when we talk about what would you like to see at that final building. We need to think as a community about what that needs to look like for us. No final decisions. In fact, I don't think even any preliminary decisions have been made, except that we think we need to have a gymnasium to be sort of a legitimate, sort of fully functional school in Houston.
They have a large enough space for things like graduation.
That's right. We don't want to have to do that off-site. We would like to be able to do those kinds of events, all of us together, in the same place, on our campus, in our home, as it were. So I'm going to need a moment. I'm going to do a little transition here. I want to show you the rendering that the architect put together. It's now when I say a fly-through, I sort of understand. We're going to be on drone, driving through, but it's a drawing, so it's not like real life. It's very strange looking thing. It's like anime, but no people.
So that's not a real building.
I can tell you that's not an actual photograph. I will say though that the pieces are there, so all these trees are actually trees that we have out there in the right spot, which I find very impressive.
Yeah, it's a free Google project. Cool.
All right. I'll let it speak for itself. This is the maze building here on the left, this is the new building, and this is the bridge connector. So this is that security checkpoint everybody has to go through. You come through the parking lot. Must come through just to get on our campus. I don't know who that woman is. She doesn't work here.
Emily grew out her hair.
So this would be going down the hall, the central hall of the new building.
Where are the lockers?
They're in this building.
The furniture looks great, but I'm not sure those are actually chairs. This is a typical classroom for 10, or we're not going to see all 10 of them. That will take forever. We're going back down the same hall we came out of, and now looking into the central campus itself. So there's our field, the reverse side of the new building. In our courtyard now, so there's Maze, and you're right about there. These are new recruits.
Loitering.
That's the entire college.
It'll have a roof.
My blood.
Oh, there it is.
So there's a, so we'll see what campus there. There's our basketball hard top, by the way, which I mentioned earlier.
How does a half soccer field work?
Um,
Is it like half court?
Played half a game.
Put a wall on the other side and kick against it.
So this is going to keep repeating until I stop it.
One more time.
I will stop at some point. But do you have any questions? There's probably lots we could talk about here, but this is sort of, again, the architect who's designing the building has put this together so we can get sort of a better idea of what that's going to look like and how it's going to operate for us.
Are there any updates to existing structures planned for August, like?
Not really for August. So again, the parking lot will become a courtyard by that time. The new parking lot will be in place by that time. But in terms of the other three buildings, they will pretty much be the way they are. That's unconnected to the building though.
Yeah.
So in terms of, but yeah, we are going to, so the floors you have under you right now, you might recall, this was filthy, putrid carpet on this building. This floor is much more sanitary, easy to maintain. You can eat lunch in here and clean up afterwards, and it's clean again. We're going to do the same thing to the floors in Building 3, probably over Christmas break. So when you return in January, you should have a different surface on those buildings as well.
Will students come out of the new building into Mays to use the restroom?
They'll have their own restrooms in that building.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, so one of the things, apparently in the 1970s when these buildings were built, people didn't use bathrooms, I guess. We have sort of a deficiency of restroom space among the three buildings we have, so we made sure to really build that into the new building in a more abundant way than you might normally in a 10-classroom building.
Are all the classrooms the exact same size layout?
The 10 are pretty much the same. I think not all of them have the sink that you saw. I think 4 of them have sinks, 6 do not, but otherwise they're essentially the same.
How's the number of students per classroom?
It's based on what we think of as our maximum class size. We cap a class at 15, so those classrooms would each be able to accommodate that, maybe plus a little more, maybe 16 to 18, but that's how we size each room.
So you foresee the new building being kind of the high school haven of classes?
No.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so we will probably move a lot of lower school into there. But one of the things we're going to do is we have a lot of teachers who teach every period. And if they do, they'll have their own classroom space that they're able to own. And so that helps the classrooms look better. And so it'll kind of be dependent on the teacher we station there. But also some classes, art classes and science classes, will be in the rooms with the sinks.
Makes sense, yeah.
And the graph said 2020, but this is for August of 2019?
Yeah, no, the 2020 I think is when we sort of maybe look at maybe the next iteration of the final building. At least begin to think about that, or finalize that plan. But this will be available. Now look, if you could be in prayer about this, lots of things we don't control. As Kate mentioned, the permitting process in Houston has become crazy since Harvey. We are hoping we can get a permit in 3 to 4 months. Assuming that works that way, construction should not take very long once we actually get started. But other things can affect construction. Lots of poor weather in the spring and summer can slow that down. If permitting goes the way we think it will, sort of the longer time frame we're expecting, we should be ready for school in August. If that takes longer, if weather slows us down, it would be unfortunate if we didn't have that building open when school started in August. That would be, but we'll solve the problem. But yeah, so that's the plan, to have those buildings, the new building and those classrooms available when we start school next year.
The lunch plan remains the same after the new building?
Lunch, yeah, I think essentially that works the same way in the future. Yeah.
My daughter in high school says she likes that she can just eat lunch anywhere.
Yeah.
Is that-
Yeah,
They always will be.
that's right. Yeah, you have to show us you can't handle that. And we have 1 or 2 students who do show us they can't handle that, but by and large, yeah, that's for those high school kids. They'll have that courtyard available to them. That'll be in a way a much more pleasant lunch period.
Most days.
Yeah. Used to be a fun place.
The general rule is 6th grade and up is allowed to wander about during lunch. They're not allowed in any of the classrooms, which I chase them out of every day. But most high schoolers just eat outside. And that lets us free up this room, any large spaces for our younger students to have a more structured lunchtime.
Is the playground complete at this point?
With the loan exception, so two things we're still kind of working on. If you've been out there, since we've had 3 straight weeks of rain, it does not drain the way we hoped that it would. And so, but we've been talking to, actually the same civil engineer who's helping us design this project, sort of added on to that. He's going to help us sort of maybe in an integrated way deal with the drainage on that side of the property as well. So we're going to have a total sort of drainage solution for the new construction as well as the old playground. So that's not that doesn't change the way we use the playground, but there might be, you know, a pipe gets built here or there or something. The other thing you'll notice, one of the reasons we have such dirty children is because we haven't been able to get grass to actually grow there yet. So we're going to do some more aggressive work over this school year to make sure that we have something growing there to reduce the mud. It's not even so much, it's not that we don't love your children or care if they're dirty, but it also erodes so much faster, like, you know, that all those contours will go away at some point if we don't get something to grow and stick there. So we've been working with a landscape architect to figure out how to make that work. We've got a good plan for that. But it might take, just, you know, it's not the time, it's not the growing season really for grass, right? You know, this coming winter. So, but over the next few months, we should have a better sort of foundation to the grass there. But so otherwise, then the playground is finished.
Construction.
Yeah.
How's this being funded? You said it was being started by the mortgage, but is that funding the entirety of this?
Yes, yeah. So between some gifts to kind of help us, you know, reach all of the down payment and the front work, and then the mortgage that'll cover the purchase of the property plus the building of the new building and the parking lot.
What's the cost of the new building?
If you break it out, it's a little under $2 million. Yeah, no, it's pretty good actually. Yeah. The purchase of the property was a good bit more than that, but when you fold all together, that sort of break up that, you know, the building's a little under $2 million, like 1.8 or something.
Do you know how many additional classrooms you're going to need for the yet to be done?
We're still sort of calculating, yeah, you're thinking about exactly, yeah. More, I think, is always the answer. But we want to make, so that's a good question. We want to make sure we have a really good answer.
Yeah.
We don't want to be wrong, right? and find that lots of schools, this is a very common theme, right? They never feel like they have enough space. So what can we do with that final piece to make sure that come what may, we have the right space? So we'll be thinking
A
about
lot of time for schools like this, the initial first floor will be designed, but to be designed for expansion on the second floor?
I talked about that, yeah. So we actually talked about that with this building.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our architect, we talked about that a long time, and his view was that a lot of work to make, so a lot, especially in Houston, a lot goes on the roof of a building, right? If you prepare that for a second floor, you have to remove all of that stuff, build your second floor, and add it back on. His thought was, given the space we have, was better to build it out further than to build it up in that way. Now, the third building, or the final building, since it really is final, our thought there would be just build it as big as it needs to be and be done with that completely. So that's in a way a more ambitious project, right? It's going to cost more to build 3 stories instead of 2 or 1. We really need a minimum of 2. We're going to have a gymnasium in there. So it's going to be 2 for sure. But let's put that 3rd story on, let's finish that project off. The cost of removing, putting back, you know, adding and putting back on is not much different than building that 3rd floor now. So I say now as in like it's happening this day, right? But when we get to that final building, we'll probably just complete the whole thing. Design it as we need to completely meet our needs, and just build that structure.
We also have some real flexibility with this building and building 3. If you notice, they're kind of just boxes with fake walls. And so we know that this is like, it's not even real. Like, I don't know what it's made of. You can hear right through it, right? Like, so we need to redesign the interior of both spaces very easily to make them more efficient for classroom space as well.
Yeah, that's
we've been
another
talking
reason.
about that.
Like we don't have a firm answer exactly how many classrooms in that final building, because we don't know how many classrooms will be in this building at that time, because this could easily change. And it's a matter of then just sort of weighing costs and use of space. What's the best use of this and the best use of the next structure on top of that, and put that all together.
What are the efficiencies of the building? Are it green, solar?
Well, it's not solar powered. You know, there's these days the code's pretty elaborate on those sorts of things. It's not my expertise. I don't really know. But there will be some investments up front to make sure that, of course, we're complying with the code, but to make sure that that building's just sustainable for us, because we don't want to be spending tons of money on it. I mean, truth be told, we are spending more than I wish we were on, say, West, which is really was not built any of those things in mind at all. It's functional, right? It works. It holds 3 classrooms for us. We can do a whole lot better than that in the future. Somebody else had a question?
It's oriented correctly.
How will the new
East-west.
expenses
Yeah.
affect tuition down there?
How what?
How will these new expenses affect tuition?
So our goal has always been to set tuition at the actual cost of educating students. This shouldn't affect tuition at all, hypothetically, right? The mortgage that we're paying is actually very similar to the rent we were paying. So it hardly changes that part of our expense. Now down the road, as we get further, like look at the final piece there, the larger building. The idea is to, again, to sort of, we price it at what it costs to educate the student, not the ancillary pieces. So we'll need to do some fundraising, we'll need to find ways to do that. But this shouldn't change your bottom line, right? We're not asking you, in a sense, to, sort of through the back door, pay for our new structures. But again, that's an item for prayer and your help as far as if to the degree you're willing to lend it. We need to identify those people who can help us do that.
Who are those? Like, am I that person, or is it people from the church who are interested in this kind of school in the community? I don't understand.
It could be any of those things and more, right?
People who want their name on something and are willing to pay millions of dollars.
If that's sure.
And those people, definitely.
We've never had a fundraising plan that relies on parents.
Right.
We expect our parents to pay their tuition. We don't expect them to then participate in annual funds and all that stuff. And so.
Now, we wouldn't say no to
make it for
you.
community donors. Yeah, unless you feel like you've got some extra cash money.
Unless you really want it to be there.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I guess.
And so it's all the same.
My question moves to a little of what you described in the beginning, Kate, was that, will then the school take on the personality of the biggest donor, or the personality of the Orthodox Church, which I just don't understand what that is. So it sounds like you wanted to protect against that.
Yeah, actually, one of the goals of our fundraiser is right now, we are really supported by a very small group. And that means that if they ever decided to impose their personality on us, we have a real problem. They've never done that. They're amazing that way. But widening the donor pool is what best protects against that.
Right.
Because if you have lots of sources of income, then one person who says, I'll build you a building if you do everything I want,
Right.
and you're like,
Yeah, you're more free to say no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a danger of any school.
Roughly speaking, I probably shouldn't say this out loud. In today's dollars, right? Like, and this will change, 3 or 4 years when we get around to maybe building that final building. Costs go up. But right now, just a round figure, it would cost us something like maybe $6 million to build that final piece. To me, that sounds like an awful lot of money, I imagine to most of you. But we live in a city that is thriving, and that is not a daunting figure for a school like us. It's not 60 million, right? And I know some universities who needed $60 million, right? That's an achievable figure. I don't think it's outrageous. And then, of course, once we do that, as a school, we're kind of complete in terms of our facilities and our property. And that's a beautiful situation to be in at that point. As those costs, they begin to, you're just maintaining, you're not building, we can become very efficient at that point. And we're looking forward to the day when even a mortgage is not our problem anymore. But that's a reachable goal. That's not outrageous. That's a number that's doable in Houston.
In 5 years or 8 years, when you're at 500 students and you've got a fully formed campus, and all of us have gotten a lot better about saying why we send our kids here, how do you protect against, or how do you choose the kids that you allow in?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's going to, if all of this happens,
Yes.
it's going to get more popular, you're going to
Yes.
get more kids, and then you're back in the elites only thing, right? So how do you?
So there's kind of two answers to that. We do all family interviews because it's the families that matter the most. If you have parents who are on board with things like school discipline or school rules, then there's a lot you can do for a 9-year-old who needs some moral formation. If you have parents who aren't on board, there's almost nothing you can do. And so we really look to the whole family unit. We find that this is where word of mouth really, really helps. Because if you all, who are families who fit here, who love it here, tell your friends, which is always how we've never advertised. That's the only thing we've done is people have told
We've
other
gone from
people
0 to
about it.
almost 200 without advertising.
Yeah, and I love it because I'm not just getting strangers off the street. I'm getting people who come and they have at least some idea why they're here and what they're looking for, and that's been a huge help to us. The other piece is trying to keep tuition affordable so that we're not a rich kid's school, because that brings with it a lot of cultural problems. And so far, we've never turned down a family for financial reasons. We have 4 priests on the board of 6 people, and they're very committed to that maintaining and that staying true. And that helps us a lot too, because people from a very wide group of communities. We also have a lot of particular parishes who are just doing good jobs in their communities, and we end up having these concentrations from different churches of all different stripes. Like your guys' church, it's like our top, at least I haven't looked at the statistic in over a year, but last year when I did, our top 4 churches were Baptist, Catholic, Orthodox, and Presbyterian. Like those, the concentration of families. So still a very ecumenical group of people, but they're kind of parishes who seem to support what we're doing even if they don't know it. And so families are kind of getting it from all sides, and that's been really helpful to us as well.
So you mentioned like a 5 to 8 year time frame. What I'm about to say might not fit in that. But if we, at some future point, get to a situation where there's just a very overwhelming demand for what we do, there's no rule that says we couldn't start another campus in another part of town. I have plenty to do to keep me busy between now and then, so I'm not asking for that.
But the model would be duplicate, not expand.
Right. We don't want this to be a 2,000 student campus. We don't want this ever to be more than a 500 student campus at absolute most. But could there be more than one 400 or 500 student campus in Houston? I think absolutely there could. I think there's plenty of, as people understand education and how we do it, I think we will likely see lots more families interested than we do now, and as that word sort of filters out. And I think easily we could multiply the campuses, but not the student body here. We need more people with $6 million though.
Bob, can I just say too, I think another thing to keep in mind when we think about the school expanding, becoming very successful, and then sort of the fear of the school sort of turning into maybe a school that is a little bit more similar to the other premier private schools in Houston. The families that are attracted to our school are attracted to us because we are not like all of the other premier private schools in Houston. And so we aren't gluttons for punishment. I wouldn't go far to say that, but I think we would all, the people who work here, would way rather work very hard and start another campus to meet the demand of other families who also feel like the private schools in Houston aren't really meeting the needs that you see, rather than us becoming the very thing that you guys came here to avoid.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I think you speak for every.
Yeah.
And we kind of work with.
We are also gluttons for punishment.
Any other questions?
I have one, but I'm not sure who would answer this, and it's probably off topic.
That means Lily, probably.
Education for co-ed education as opposed to single sex. In lower grades versus upper grades versus college.
So because we started out, we never considered being a single-sex school because we needed whole families to come. So I've never really thought about it. I see it as though, I guess this is a little opposed to a lot of the models. I'd be way more interested in it in lower school because of developmental differences that seem to come along with how much of your math you can do before you need to run around. Yeah, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility. There's a couple things we've considered with lower school. We've considered this is a very, this would be a very difficult idea to implement, but it's actually very practical when it comes to educational purposes. Sorting by kind of ability level rather than age. So maybe if you're new to the school and you would typically be a second grader, but you haven't had the language arts things that we've done really differently, you might be in a classroom with some younger kids because you're all working on the same skills. So there's a lot of things like that we considered in single-sex education in lower school would be one of those things. we haven't moved in that direction at all. And we definitely wouldn't until we have at least 2 sections of every grade level, because then you would approximately have the right number of kids to do it. In high school, it's been valuable. We have our college freshmen are all boys right now, which has made a
So
really
it's single
interesting
sex?
dynamic. Yeah. Our college is a single sex institution right now.
So,
Yeah.
since you mentioned that, that was an accident, it was by design, but it has, in a way that none of us anticipated, it has influenced the discussions we have sometimes. And sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, but the positives were more telling than I would have expected. And so what we've been thinking about is, once we do achieve a more critical mass among incoming classes, 12 to 15 students, maybe on occasion, not all year long, but breaking out into single-sex discussions at certain times throughout the year to gain the benefit of that, while still sort of having the whole family, whole human idea of community at the same time. Yeah.
I have a couple comments, and probably a couple questions. I'm not sure where to ask that, but regarding the ability, I've been in institutions and schools where there's a classroom like, oh, that's the dumb classroom.
Right.
And,
yeah, you want to avoid that.
And I'm also very familiar with the Montessori method, where you have the older children with other abilities kind of helping those younger children. That was my comment on that. I have some questions on some of like the standardization. And I'm guilty of emailing Mr. Nichols this week. Why does he have an 89 in astronomy and he's not doing any homework? This is my 3rd grader. In the school last year, he was on the press and sort of, so I'm guilty of that. But I'm also seeing, I teach at the university level, and I'm teaching, I specifically asked to teach this freshman symposium so I could understand the youth these days in the generation, and we were talking a lot about cheating and plagiarism and definitions of this, and every one of them, they were explaining the amount of pressure that they feel on getting a certain grade, and I'm completely against that. I really believe in educating the whole person. I don't do well on exams. And so, and I've always told my kids, I don't care that you get straight A's, I care that you're happy and you're learning. I know that you're not learning and happy if you're not putting your all in. And I'm in a curriculum committee, and I just learned that A&M for their engineering program has just increased admission to 3.7 GPA. So we are educating our kids with the philosophy of the whole person, and we're fighting against a societal measurement. And it took me 30 years to be okay with that for my own person. So how do we help our kids? So that's one question. In addition, I forgot your one.
So I have 2 comments to this. Lower school grades go away, right? There's no permanent record of a lower school grade.
So that's not just you, that's typical, that's normal.
Yeah, that's not just you. That's just, no college is like, how'd you do in 3rd grade astronomy, Which is good, because that would be a terrible thing to do, yeah. We need
Oh, you said 89.
And so what we try to do in lower school is use those grades as an indication of development. So here are areas in which they can improve. You guys notice there's like this weird grading system that we're always trying to figure out and work best with, but it's because we don't think a B measures a 9-year-old very well, right? What does that even mean for a 9-year-old? And so we try to use words, like they've mastered the subject, or they need improvement in the subject. In high school, we actually try pretty carefully to allow a student to get the GPA they want. I'll tell you right now, because I just did this for our annual school report for colleges, our lowest senior GPA is a 3.6. The seniors are strong, they're a strong class, but they know how